News. I'm Tim McGuire. The presidents of Egypt and Libya have made assurances to President Barack Obama that they will work with the U.S. to provide security in the wake of the attack on the consulate in Benghazi and the violent protests outside the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. The U.S. ambassador to Libya, Chris Stevens, and 3 other Americans were killed in the attack, which a growing number of people say may have been planned. Former Ambassador Martin Indyk, Director of Foreign Policy for the Brookings Institution, says,
I suspect that we will discover it was an al-Qaeda attack because, as you say, it occurred on 9/11. We already seem to know from administration officials that it was a premeditated attack, not just a mob that got out of control.
The search for those behind the anti-Muslim film that may have set off the mobs in both countries has led the AP to a California Coptic Christian previously convicted of financial crimes who acknowledges his role in helping to produce the movie. No class again today for some 350,000 Chicago public school students. The teacher strike is in its 4th day.
I'm Rita Foley. The 4 Americans killed when protesters attacked the U.S. consulate in Libya earlier this week have come home. Our Mark Smith reports on the ceremony outside Washington.
In a somber ceremony at Andrews Air Force Base,
canisters, water cannons were used against the protesters as well. And then you have, on the other hand, Muslim Brotherhood groups who are quite peaceful. They're chanting, God is greatest. They're marching around the square. They're loud, but they're peaceful. They're men, women, and children. And it's been like that now all afternoon.
Elsewhere today, after word spread of that anti-Islam film made in the U.S., police have been keeping protesters away from the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. In Tunisia and Yemen, police fired tear gas at thousands of demonstrators. 2 people were shot dead in Tunis, where protesters briefly stormed the U.S. Embassy compound and tore down the American flag. The credit rating agency Egan-Jones is downgrading the U.S. debt rating to AA-, saying the Fed's plans to buy mortgage bonds will likely hurt the economy more than help it. Investors apparently don't agree. Stocks closed higher today for a second day in a row. The Dow was up 54 to 13,593.
And we thank NBC for making the Jim Maceda report available to us. And in fact, there's a little more because it's not just Egypt. It's Tunisia, Lebanon, Yemen, Sudan, Iraq, Iran. I guess no surprise on Iran. But in Yemen, things are getting out of control.
There have clearly been protests, and some violent ones, Thomas, elsewhere in the Muslim world. Ongoing street battles between protesters and police in Tunis. We understand that there's now smoke coming from inside the U.S. Embassy grounds there. In Yemen, protesters tried to storm the U.S. Embassy in Sana'a. They succeeded in doing that yesterday. Today, they were pushed back by police and soldiers, some reportedly using live rounds.
Again, that's Jim Maceda from NBC, and we thank NBC for that. Understand it's also going on throughout Africa and into Sudan as well.
Very dramatic pictures out of Sudan. 3 protesters, it has now been reported, have been killed in Khartoum today when groups of angry Muslims stormed the German embassy this time. They tried to breach the British embassy and failed. This time they were smashing windows, starting fires, and again, similar scenes in Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh. But for the most part, back here in Cairo, protests have been very noisy. I'm sure you hear them behind me, but so far, relatively peaceful.
As you heard Jim Maceda from NBC report, Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh. Now we're talking South Asia, and we're talking Asia. Sudan is in Africa. We've got, Libya, Tunisia, North Africa, and Lebanon. Now we're getting all throughout the Middle East here. And in fact, it's even spreading beyond America. The British and German embassies in Sudan were attacked. The German and British embassies were attacked. A Kentucky Fried Restaurant was attacked in Lebanon. So now symbols of America. And, look at, even the United Nations had a multinational peacekeeping observer mission in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, brought under attack. We are perceived very differently in much of the world, very differently than we perceive ourselves. And we need to come to grips with that. And there's too many Americans who are, A, refusing to even acknowledge that, and B, doing this bellicose Paul Ryan-style language, this John Wayne, Gary Cooper, we're just going to shoot him out stuff. It's just not helpful. And here we are, another Friday, Here we are, another $2 billion gone in Afghanistan, $2 billion gone, $1.2 billion of our tax dollars, $800 million borrowed to finance another week in Afghanistan and more dead soldiers. For the Republicans to take things that I have said here and say, you hate America. No, I love America. I love America. I don't want Americans killed. I don't want to read these names. I don't want to see 4 diplomats from Libya come home in body bags, in coffins, to be met by the president. It is not patriotic to saber rattle. It is not patriotic to bomb. It is not patriotic to murder. Let's focus in on the Middle East and North Africa for the moment. In Egypt, Mubarak was our puppet, or perceived to be our puppet. Let me suggest to you he was our puppet for 30 years. And he suppressed the people there mercilessly. We have supported dictators and continue to do so in Saudi Arabia. Jordan, although Jordan's a somewhat more benevolent dictatorship. We did it in Iraq with Saddam Hussein. We did it in Iran with the Shah of Iran. We are known throughout the Middle East for supporting, installing, overthrowing, all designed to have our puppets in control. And when we have had our puppets in control, we have exploited the people there. Understand that we are perceived in the Middle East on the street very differently than we perceive ourselves. We love to pat ourselves on the back and say, we are the leader of the free world. We're the guardians of freedom. I mean, we use all these platitudes to tell the world and ourselves just how wonderful we are. There are large portions of the world, especially the Middle East, that don't agree with that, and they have a lot of evidence to the opposite conclusion. And the same thing is happening in Libya. I mean, we were against Muammar Gaddafi for a long time, but we started cozying up to him, and it was because we helped to stop the genocide in Libya that there were pro-American demonstrations going on in Libya now. But I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news that is the exception to the rule. We are perceived in many nations around the Middle East and in North Africa as being the heavy-handed foreign manipulator of their people and suppressor and repressor of their people through puppets. Iran has hated us for a long time because of the Shah of Iran. And in Iraq, just recently, we invaded Iraq under false pretenses. We killed, and we didn't even count how many people we killed. What is it, 100,000, a million? We've displaced a couple of million. It's about time we recognize that we don't own the world and we don't control it all. Now, those are some tough words, and I've had some tough words to say, but it's time we became mature Americans here and realize that we don't get to just run around the world doing as we please, and the people are going to respond, and they view us as the terrorists. This is the place where justice is served. It's the Norman Goldman Show.
Being fiercely independent does not mean we have to agree with each other 100% of the time on everything. This is the Norman Goldman Show.
I just think that there's so much to be done.
We've given all people need to know and understand.
This is Seattle's Progressive Talk, AM 1090. Listen live, anywhere, anytime at am1090seattle.com.
There are protests happening everywhere. I don't believe it's all because of this ridiculous little movie trailer. I believe it is pretextual that, look, there's a lot of unemployed young men in a lot of these countries. When you get a lot...
Understand that there's now smoke coming from inside the U.S. Embassy grounds there. In Yemen, protesters tried to storm the U.S. Embassy in Sana'a. They succeeded in doing that yesterday. Today they were pushed back by police and soldiers, some reportedly using live rounds.
Well, there's a lot in a lot of places. Egypt, Tunisia. You heard Jim Maceda, they're talking about Tunis. That's Tunisia. That's the head of the capital of Tunisia. Egypt, Tunisia, Yemen, Lebanon, Sudan, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh. It goes on and on. This is spreading like wildfire. And I don't think it's all because of this movie. There are a lot of other things going on. I do believe a lot of it's blowback because we have a very bad reputation around this world. And if you missed the show opening today, every day's show opening is free. Every day's show opening is free at normangoldman.com. Podcasting the whole show is $5 a month at normangoldman.com with everything stripped out. We have free internet streaming through normangoldman.com. We have free streaming through Facebook. You can go to the Norman Goldman Show on Facebook. We've got free apps for you at normangoldman.com for your smartphone. The radio stations that carry us, many of them stream our show. So, look, there's lots of ways to get this show live, free, anywhere. And if all else fails, $5 a month, podcasting at normangoldman.com. We have covered a lot of ground today, exactly 1 hour ago. $1 billion a month, $40 billion a month of bond buying, mortgage-backed securities.
Norman Goldman, it's MarkTaylor-Canfiel. How are you?
Hi, Mark. Thanks for calling.
Hey, I'm so glad we still have freedom of speech in this country, because I love tuning in and hearing your voice on the air, challenging all the commercial crap that I hear on most radio stations. So thank you for doing that.
Whoa, the liberals.
I wanted to let everybody know, we talked about this before, that the grand jury investigation of activists here reconvened this week. So there's been vigils at the courthouse ever since Friday night when they had a candlelight vigil. But what people should really know about, and I know it's a heavy news day, but this weekend, folks are gathering from all over the country in New York City because it's the 1 anniversary of the Occupy Wall Street movement that started there on Wall Street last year. And so people are going to be in New York City all weekend, and they're holding training sessions for all these activists. And then there's going to be one of the musicians from Rage Against the Machine is going to put on a concert. And then on Monday, folks are actually going to converge around Wall Street. And what they're expecting is for the New York Police Department to set up a perimeter and not to allow them, near the stock market. But what they're going to do is just once they're asked for ID and denied entrance into that area of New York City, they're just going to all sit down at those intersections. So we'll see what happens. But they wanted people to know, the folks in New York City, that the occupiers there, that there's 2 prongs to this anniversary. And one is to show, a critique of what's happening in the country, especially on Wall Street. But they also want people to know that they're doing a lot of training during these events. So the demonstration is just one part, of what they're trying to express there.
Mark, with all the craziness that's gone on this week, I totally forgot about the 1-year anniversary of Occupy Wall Street. It's coming on Monday.
Yeah, there will be major demonstrations all around the country, and folks in Seattle are going to be marching on September 17th as well, which is actually Monday. But people are going to be gathering in New York City all weekend. And I'll be blogging about this for the Huffington Post, and I have a new blog at salon.com. But hopefully people will be, paying attention on Monday to what's going on in this country, because, I totally agree with you. One of the grievances actually in my Declaration of Independence from Wall Street is, blaming Wall Street and the financiers and the corporations for encouraging, this military-industrial complex that's financing, promoting, and profiting from these foreign military interventions. So, once again, I don't think it's a left or right issue, and I agree with you. Labels are for cans. I reject them. But I think that, people in this country really need to wake up. We need to grow up, and we need to have intelligent conversations like you have on your program and be honest with people.
Well, Mark, thanks. And let me ask you a question. I mean, when the Ron Paul people who claim to be libertarians, and for our purposes here, I'll grant them that, when they and folks like you and me and so many of the people who are part of our community here on this show, when we can find common ground on the issue that you're talking about, this international empire, this global empire that we've built, shouldn't that be a lesson to all of us, that if we just tone down the heat and forget the labels, that we can find big common ground on really monumental and expensive issues? I mean, isn't that a lesson to be learned for all of us?
I would say yes, and by the way, people can go to S17NYC, that's for September 17th, S17NYC.org, to find out the calendar and everything that's happening in New York City. But I agree with you, Norm. We are a 99% movement. That includes everyone.
And Mark, on that note, I got to go because the clock is my enemy. Mark, thanks so much. We are right back at it here next week where justice is served. The Norman Goldman Show.
If you missed any part of the show, podcasting is available at normangoldman.com.